Hello friends, Jeff here from House of Heresy and back again. This time we're going to do something a little bit different. I know I do mostly box breaks on this channel so far, but I do have kind of sprinkled on some other content throughout, so I wanted to start doing some stuff that I can release kind of off the usual release schedule that I have of Tuesday and Thursday box break videos. So if you've watched any of my videos for any length of time, I definitely drop hints about some of the stuff that I do and play within Magic the Gathering. As I'm sure most of you know that have done that or listened to all those, I'm primarily a Commander or EDH player. And pretty much all my deck building is based around that. So a lot of the cards that when I'm pulling them, that's kind of the focus that I have. And one of my, probably I would say my premier deck is my Gyruda deck. So I wanted to just do a video kind of going through deck tech. I am by no means an expert. This is not the be-all end-all. And I would say that as you're watching this, you know, if it looks like kind of a cool deck or see some interesting cards, then by all means, let me know. Or if you see things that you think I'm missing that might be better in here, definitely would love to know that too. Because the fun part about Commander is that you can play with almost any card in Magic's history. And that's a lot. So for those of us that haven't played consistently the entire way through, there's a lot of cards that I just don't know about or miss. And if it doesn't pop up through something else or on EDH Rec or something like that, then I probably wouldn't know about it. So love to hear it. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. So Gyruda is a card that came out in Ikoria. So this particular version of the card is one of the Godzilla ones. Gyruda is actually I would say probably my favorite Magic card, just in terms of how much I play and build decks around him. Any format that I've been able to play since I started with him, I have built a deck for him pretty much. The only thing I haven't done is Modern yet, or Pioneer I guess would be legal as well. And that's something I will look into doing at some point. I just don't play Modern. I don't have a group that I would play with locally at this point, so it hasn't been a huge push for me to do it. But when Ikoria came out on Arena, I had just kind of downloaded Arena on a whim, sitting here with COVID, getting ready to ship off overseas. And it was just something to do for a little bit of time. I have a long history with Magic and thought it'd be kind of fun. And I just happened to pull this card. And actually happened to draft it in an Arena draft of all things. And it just kind of all came together with how, like what I drafted and then how the card interacted with. And then I've kept playing it since then. I played it in Standard on Arena. I played it in Historic on Arena. I've currently played Historic Brawl, and obviously Commander. So this wasn't one of the first decks that I built when I started playing Commander with my friends, with like in-person paper Magic, but it was pretty close. And it's definitely, I would consider this, as you'll see, to be my premier deck in terms of just the quality of the cards. Obviously, if you've watched any length of my channel, you know that I enjoy all the big flashy stuff. So anything that comes out of a collector pack, I probably enjoy. That's part of what's kind of kept me engaged with Magic, is I really like all the cool borderless, alternate art, extended art, the masterpieces, like all that different stuff. I just think is really neat, because it wasn't really, for most of my history with Magic, I just didn't really, wasn't really exposed to that. Didn't really exist when I started in the 90s, and then I just wasn't really aware of it. I played it during the Amonkhet period for a little bit, but I just had no idea about the invocations and all that stuff. So, all right, let's get into it. So, Gyruda, Doom of the Depths, or Doom of Depths, is a Dimir commander. I do not play him as a companion, but I'll talk about that in a second here. So, he is a 6 CMC or 6 mana value commander. He is 4 generic and then can be the Dimir colors twice there. So I do play with the full spectrum. I don't just limit it to black or to blue. Obviously, he's legendary. He's a demon and a kraken. He's a 6/6, and if you were to play him as a companion, and I have seen it on Brawl, I've never seen anybody in person in EDH play with a commander. I know it's totally legitimate. People do it. I just haven't seen it. So I can't really speak to how he would perform in that. But if he was your commander, then you'd have to limit your deck to only even CMC cards. As your commander, that's not applicable, so you can have whatever you want in there. However, his second ability really rewards you having even CMC cards in your deck. So the real meat of him is when he enters the battlefield, each player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard, put a creature with an even converted mana cost from among those cards onto the battlefield under your control. And one of the cool things about how they worded this, and it's true, it's the way it's depicted in Arena, with the Gather, all that stuff, is that those cards don't have to stay in the graveyard for you to still have access to them. So even if they get exiled immediately, like if you have Leyline of the Void or something out, you can still pull from those. Now there's certain cards that once they enter the graveyard, that you might not be able to interact with them at that point, like Grafdigger's Cage is kind of a hard counter to this ability. But in general, as long as there's not something precluding you from pulling a card out of exile or out of the graveyard, then you can still use him. So I've seen some different ways that you can play him. You don't see Gyruda a lot, although I have started to see him more in Historic Brawl lately on Arena, which is kind of cool. But I think probably the most common ways to play him are either like a clone or blink or something like that, and I kind of combine those two. That's kind of the main crux of the deck, because I want lots of iterations of this happening, because one, it gives you more option, gives you some cool cards out there, and if you're already prioritizing cards that enhance the ETB ability of this, and you have even costed creatures in your deck that also have ETB effects, then you're going to maximize that as well. So there's a lot of really cool synergies that you can do. You can make a lot of crazy things happen. I would say, like, probably the most I've ever done was, I think, probably 8 to 10 of these in one turn. And you can definitely get up to that with some of the cards that I'll show you here in a little bit that are in the deck. This version of the deck I would say is very powerful. I would rate it an 8.5 to 9, but that's purely because of the quality of cards that I've put in here, not necessarily because Gyruda in and of himself is a super powerful commander. He needs a lot of support, and he is by no means consistent enough or able to win early enough to really be at like a CEDH level. I have taken him to some kind of CDH-esque events that we've had at the local game store that I usually play at. But he's done well. I mean, he's very, I like to call this a high roll deck. Like, if you roll the dice and do great, you are gonna make a board state that's very uncomfortable for everybody at the table. And the best part about it, one of the things I enjoy the most about it is, much to the annoyance of my friends, is that you're not just playing with your deck, you're playing with everybody's deck. And if anybody has cool even costed creatures, you got even more options than what's just packed into this deck here. And for the longest time, I didn't own any of the Phyrexian Praetors, I didn't own any of the high-powered stuff, but I have some friends that like to play some really high-octane decks. And this is one of those commanders that lets you play with everybody's cards, and it's a ton of fun. So let's get into the meat of it. So he's the commander, 6 CMC right off the bat. It's kind of a high threshold. So that's one of the reasons why you don't see it's not a consistent enough turn 2 to 3 win. And honestly, like I need to get a huge board state, maintain that board state, and then go into a subsequent turn most of the time. There's some situations where I can win just by milling myself out, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But that's usually like an ancillary thing. That's not the main focus of this deck. That's cool if it happens. And I have won without doing a single point of damage to the other people I was playing. I just had enough of a wall up that they didn't want to attack me because it wasn't advantageous to them. And I just happened to win out because I ran out of cards and I had the ability to win because of that. So alternate win cons are always fun. And I do love mill. That's one of my favorite mechanics. This is not, I don't consider this a mill deck as well. I just want to say that. I utilize that ability with Gyruda himself, but the intent of the deck is not to mill people out. The intent of the deck is to mill in order to access other creatures or abilities that I can benefit from. So let's go ahead and get into kind of the meat and potatoes of it. So first I'm going to start with some creatures, and I have all these piles broken up to kind of different effects. So one of the, like I said before, that there's two main ways I like to interact with Gyruda. One of them is to trigger his ability, and both of them involve triggering his ability multiple times. One of them is to blink him, essentially, is what it boils down to. And that's what I'm going to talk about here. So we got some different creatures and abilities that allow you to remove him from the battlefield, bring him back in. So like Displacer Kitten is one of the newest ones. It's a little bit slow only because you have to get Displacer Kitten on the board and then you have to start casting other things. There's some more immediate effects, but it's also, this is a permanent and it's even costed. So you can bring him out with Gyruda, cast something else, and then trigger it again, or wait till the next turn or what have you. So it's a good all-around card. As soon as we got Baldur's Gate and this came out, I threw it right in there. Great card in general. It's as its monetary value shows, it's clearly desired by the community, but it's also just really good for this deck. Another staple, Deadeye Navigator. So this one, you pair them, they're soulbound, and then I can pay 1 and a blue to blink either Deadeye Navigator or the creature that it's paired with, which 9 times out of 10, that's going to be Gyruda. So great staple card. It is expensive, but usually the higher cost cards you're going to see in this deck are not meant to be hard cast. That's more of like a last resort. Like, it's getting late in the game, things aren't happening, it's in my hand, I'm going to cast it. But generally speaking, all the real high value, high power cards you want to pull out with Gyruda as early as possible. So that's a big one. Thassa Deep Dwelling, this is a huge staple, such a good card. Just in general, like people build commander decks around Thassa on their own. Fairly low CMC for what she does. 4 mana. She's indestructible. She's not a creature, so she shuts off a lot of interaction unless you meet the devotion threshold there. And at that point, you have an indestructible 6/5. At the beginning of your end step, you exile a creature you control and then return it to the battlefield. So she gets a blink every turn for free. And she has this great ability that can be used defensively to tap another target creature. So you can actually shut down your opponent's big whatever coming at you before it happens. Great for really any single target that you just don't want to have attack, either because of an attack trigger, or you don't have a good blocker, or you're going to have to make sacrifices that you don't want to have to make. So Thassa is just a staple for this deck, and great in her own right, but this is just like such a critical card. One of the probably top 5 cards in the deck. Here's another one that kind of is not necessarily specific to blinking, but allows you to copy the ability so that you can blink more times, because Gyruda likes to generate a very large board state in a very short amount of time. And the more ways that you can make that happen, the better. And if you can pay 2 mana to do it instead of having to cost another card that can be countered, then that's great. Again, it's a little bit slow. You're essentially paying 4 mana to get the first effect. But if you can do it, like, it's a 6 CMC spell, and if you don't have a lot of ramp out early, you got time to build the board state leading into Gyruda. So this is a pretty solid card. Then we get into a bunch of different either token generators or blink. So this one lets you create a token that's a copy of it, and you can do it again from the graveyard. Panoramaticon, another one of those staples. This is an ETB copying effect. So great for Gyruda, great for all the other cards that provide ETBs either from your deck or from the creatures that you pull from your opponents. Again, another one of the staples. Hard not to put this in there. 4 mana, it's same as Thassa, so you can get it out kind of earlier, unless you're just like really ramping hard, you can get it out before Gyruda pretty easily. Conjurer's Closet, this provides a blink effect at the end of the turn, just like Thassa. It's free, it's on the board. It is 5 mana, so it can be a little situational, but with all the ETB effects that are in this deck, it's just it can be very you can use it very tactically as needed. But if no other reason than just to get more Gyruda effects there. And then we get into some of the instant speed, or I think most of them are instants, that let you just blink. So you got some 2 mana ones. Some of these I think are a little bit more tactical than others, for lack of a better term, or they have a little bit more utility. So like, some of them are specific to your creatures. This one is not. This can be any artifact or creature on the battlefield. So if you have something that's about to go off, same thing, like you want to take a big scary creature out of combat, You just blink it, and then it re-enters the battlefield, and it's summoning 6, so can't go forward with it. So that's a good one. Ghostly Flicker. This one is one that you control. It costs a little bit more, but you can do up to 2. So if you have multiple ETB creatures on the battlefield or artifacts, which you really... I don't think I have too many ETB artifacts in this deck, but for some reason you wanted to use these defensively as well. Like 9 times out of 10, I'm going to use him for Gyruda to get his ability, but there might be times where I want to save something that's being targeted by one or more of my opponents or something like that. Displace, same thing. Just blink in. Teferi's Time Twist. This one's a little bit different because it's not an immediate thing. So this one could actually be beneficial if you're like facing a board wipe. You'll blink defensively. Obviously, I prefer to just use it for Gyruda, but if you needed to, this one would come in, blink back at the end of, or at the beginning of the next end step. So you could potentially dodge a board wipe. So you're not blinking in response, only to have him come back in. Essence Flux, same thing. Your creature. It's a one mana cost, so that's always helpful. Spirit doesn't really matter so much. It's just a cheap, easy blink. And then Siren's Roost, same thing. I do actually have a pirate in this deck, I think. For sure 1, maybe 2. So that's helpful. Might get a card draw if that happens. So blink is like one of the big ones because that's easy. Gyruda's already on the table, so you're just making it happen. Next one is a little bit more not situational, but there's a little bit higher cost associated. Not with Sakashima, but just in general, and that is clone effects. Downside to cloning a legendary creature is you, most of the time, unless you're breaking the rules somehow, like with Sakashima, you have to pick who you're going to clone, and that can be very dependent on the situation of the board. It might be advantageous to have a copy or a token on the board instead of Gyruda himself. Fortunately, you'd have to recast him at a higher mana cost due to the commander task or tax, but I mean it's possible. There's situations where that could happen. Sakashima is great because he just ignores that. He says, "Oh, you're legendary. I don't care. Doesn't apply." So he's another one of those staple ones. It's such a good card for his cost. One of the great cards to come out of Commander Legends original. Then we get into some more clone effects. Undercover Operative is great. It's a clone, but it's also similar to like some of the blink effects. This one can actually target any creature on the battlefield. So you might pick, maybe your opponents have something that they wouldn't want to attack into, or it's primarily defensively, or might be beneficial, like say somebody's got their own Thassa Deep Dwelling out there who happens to be a creature, and then you can make a copy of her. This is one of those situations where if I did copy Gyruda, I might consider keeping the copy because it comes in with a shield counter on it. The downside to that is that as often as I blink Gyruda, not having him on the board is I can't, if he's not on the board and I blink this guy, then I lose that ability to copy him. So that part's a little bit situational, but having the shield counter can be beneficial because that will allow him to survive some situations. Mirror Hall Mimic, similar situation. Any copy or can copy any creature on the battlefield, but it's a spirit, and then it does have a disturb cost. The disturb is it's a really powerful ability. I just don't use it very often because it's kind of slow. But basically, at the beginning of your upkeep, you'll create a token of the copy of whatever's enchanted. So if I could reasonably expect to keep Gyruda around, I might do this. The downside again is that I can't blink Gyruda at that point because then this would fall off. So it doesn't happen very often. I would honestly be more likely to do this on one of my high payoff creatures that I bring in with Gyruda, which we'll talk about more in a little bit, where I'm probably not going to blink or might not blink. I just want the ETB effect or a big body or something like that. But it's nice to have the option. I like cards that provide utility beyond just the initial thing that they're doing there. Vizier of Many Faces, same thing. It can be anything on the battlefield, and then it's also got Embalm, so you can recast it again from the graveyard, which is helpful, getting extra abilities. Sakashima's Protege, I don't use her a ton because 6 mana to hardcast is kind of rough, but anytime that I get her pulled from Gyruda, then it's just another clone effect, which is nice. But Gyruda, the downside to her is that Gyruda has to have come into the battlefield this turn. So that's almost always going to happen. In fact, that it will always happen if you're pulling her off of a cascade, or not a cascade, off of his effect triggering, because he has to ETB for that effect to trigger. So anytime you're casting her with Gyruda, then it's a legitimate target. If you're hard casting her, then it might not be as effective there. But it's any permanent that enters the battlefield, so you could use this on your opponent's turn with flash, and then you get the benefit of cascade as well. So again, some utility. I don't hard cast her very often, but it's possible. Spark Double, another one of those ones that's just like really iconic part of the deck here. One of the key cards. This is another one that ignores the legendary rule, and this actually becomes a great target for other copies because you're copying this copy, which doesn't have the legendary rule. So that means that you can have a bunch of Gyrudas on the board. Anytime I can get Spark Double out before I start cloning is a great time, because then it doesn't matter what I'm doing with Gyruda. I got this one guy here who's already got a +1/+1 counter on him, and gets the ability to be copied without you having to pick a legendary creature or choose which copy of the legendary creature you want. So a great all-around one. Same thing, it's 4 mana cost, so I mean you could reasonably hard cast this if you had to for some reason. And it also copies Planeswalkers too. Downside is he only copies your creatures and Planeswalkers, so you don't have the added utility of being able to target somebody else's, but still really solid, highly recommend it. Phyrexian Metamorph, same thing. Just a clone effect. Can be any artifact or creature on the battlefield, so that's, again, can be very helpful, and it's got the Phyrexian cost, so you can pay a little bit less in mana if you needed to. And then finally, Clone, just because, why not? It's clones. So, not much to say about it, it's just straight up battlefield, or any creature on the battlefield for 4 mana, so just all around. It's one of those classic ones. It's been in Magic for forever. It might have, I think Clone was in Alpha and Beta. I could be wrong, but I know it came in early in Magic's history there. So it's been a little bit outdone by some of the other ones because they have added benefits, but still, it's just an all-around good card. So those are like the two main groups of abilities that I'm using to benefit or to I guess abuse Gyruda's ability, so it's not just a one-time thing when he comes in. The next step, or the next stack here, is going to be a bunch of creatures that Gyruda likes to pull out and generally have good ETB effects, or just have powerful effects in general. So pretty much, I think all of these are even costed. I kind of got rid of like the opposition agents and some of the other utility cards that I can't pull out with Gyruda, just because it always feels bad when they just always go into the graveyard as I'm milling through my deck. So Massacre Worm is a huge one, especially if you have the ability to blink or clone or whatever. Like, this is such a powerful card. I know it's got an expensive cost and a big body, but when you get it on the board, it's pretty much almost a perfect board wipe as long as you can do it enough to kill off all the creatures. It puts -2/-2 onto the enemy creatures until end of turn, and if you stack these multiple times, they keep getting -2/-2. So it gets around. Big thing is that it gets around indestructible, and it gets around like Shroud and Hexproof because it's not targeting them. So it's just a really strong effect on a body that is reproducible in this deck. And on top of that, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, they lose 2 life. So you can really quickly, especially if you're fighting a token deck like on Arena, like I would just be drooling if I was playing against like a I don't know, like an elf token deck, or a Scoot Swarm deck. Like if that Scoot Swarm player, when the turn he went off, he wasn't swinging in for lethal, it was game over. If I had Massacre Worm just waiting for me, and I would in a non-brawl format, I would run 4 Massacre Worms in my deck. So great card. I love it. It's one of my favorite ones. Just very strong for what it does. Hostage Taker, here's the one pirate in the deck. It's a good way to kind of do single target removal, and you actually have the ability to steal. You still have to pay for it, but you can exile and then cast whatever you're targeting there. So same thing, like you steal something. Could even be something as simple as like a Soul Ring or a Chrome Mox or something like that. Just play it and then blink them and you can do it again. And it's for creatures and artifacts, so very powerful. I know it's not like a super popular card, but in this deck, it provides a lot of utility, a lot of single target removal on a body that allows me to abuse it with the different effects that Gyruda takes advantage of. Ravenous Chupacabra, this is another great one. Just come in, murder a creature, rinse, repeat, just keep doing it through Thassa or through clone effects or whatever. It's just a nice ETB effect that's repeatable. You got Panharmonicon down, you're doing it twice, or however many times, double the amount of times that you're blinking them. So it's just really a solid card. Same thing with Noxious Gearhulk, except you get to gain life equal to the creature's toughness that you're destroying. So just really powerful, strong card for this effect. It's one that, like, if you had to, you could hard cast in an emergency, just straight up destroying the creature. And you get some life out of it. Amphimutineer, this is one that I really like, actually. I don't have him in a ton of my decks, but I kept pretty much every copy I ever pulled from Commander Legends because I think it's a really strong card. For 4 mana, you get to exile a target non-salamander creature, and then they create a 4/3. So it's like Pongify, a little bit stronger for the opponent than Pongify on a body that has an ETB effect and Encore. So if this does end up in your graveyard, you can bring him back in and Encore it for the amount of opponents that you have on there. So just anytime you can exile instead of destroy, just really strong. Burning Rune Demon, this is a great one. This is a tutor on a body. It's really easy in this deck to force your opponent to make hard choices about the 2 cards. In EDH format, there's really no downside to using this because every card that's not a land in your deck has 2 different names. So, and it's not going to be Burning Rune Demon because you're not allowed to have multiple copies of him in your deck. So when ETBs, you search your library for 2 cards not named Burning Rune Demon that have different names, reveal them, and then an opponent chooses one of them to put into your hand, and then the other goes into your graveyard. And with some of the recursion that we'll get into in a little bit here, it's really, a lot of times you can create a situation where it's no fail. Like you either get the creature that you want, or they give you the recursion, which you then pull the creature in. So, and a lot of times for cheaper than actually casting it, sorry. So great card. A little expensive if you were to hard cast it, but with Gyruda, it's great coming out. Solemn Simulacrum just gives you some ramp, gives you some card draw. Just good all around, just easy to throw in here. Torrential Gearhulk, this one's a little bit more situational because you're only his effect is only for instants. I kind of go back and forth as to whether I want him in here or not. There's definitely situations where it's like the last resort for me, especially on Arena where you're playing one-on-one. A lot of times this is what gets me out of like what would be clearly game-ending situations for me. But it really depends on what's in your graveyard. And Gyruda pulling him out at times when you don't have instants on there kind of feels bad. I mean, he's still a 5/6, but to make full use of him, it can be a little situational. This one does not have an ETB effect, but it's just a really strong card. I love Phyrexian Obliterator. It makes it super challenging for your opponents to work around. They really need non-damage producing removal to get rid of him, or else he makes it for a very bad day. Definitely one of the least read cards in my experience on Arena. I can't tell you how many times I've had people just straight up attack or do like 5 points of damage if it's like a red burn deck into him, only to then get the effect pop up on the stack and then concede. So great card. Hopefully your opponents in Paper Magic are actually taking the time to read it, because it just kind of feels bad if that person's in front of you and they do that, and then it's like, well, you got to blow up 5 of your permanents now. Sorry, buddy. But just all around good card. Arcana Cruelty, here's another great one. This one came out of Modern Horizons 2. He has an ETB and an attack trigger, so if you can get him on the board and he stays, he's going to have lasting impact. Just really good card draw, really punishing for your opponent. Whoever you pick, they're probably going to hate you. And it's a 6/6 flyer, so helps protect a little bit against those flying armies or decks. So really good. Haunt of Hightower. This is one I actually kind of really glossed over. I don't even remember how I got the card itself. I think I don't remember, but it wasn't a card that I set out to acquire to put in this deck. I just happened to, when I was building my Historic Brawl version of this, I put it in there, and after having seen it in action so many times in there, this is such a strong card. this will make or break a lot of games for opponents that whether they do or don't have the ability to deal with him, because every time Gyruda's triggering with let's say 3 opponents, you're talking +12, and then on top of that he does an additional discard or card put into the graveyard when he attacks. So he's if you can get him down before Gyruda or in the midst of Gyruda going off, he is going to become an insanely large body, and he's got lifelink. And I've definitely got well over 100 health in a very short amount of time, and he's obnoxious to deal with. So great card. Again, very expensive to just hard cast it, but if you can pull it out with Gyruda, it's awesome. This is another one of those ones that gives me a little bit of recursion for instants and sorceries. Kind of go back and forth whether I want to keep him in here, because it can be a little situational. If you pull him out early, it doesn't do anything for you if you don't have it in the graveyard. But it's a nice way to get a little bit extra value out of your instants or sorceries, especially like removal or tutors or whatever, if you're really digging for some answer. So kind of handy. Certainly not essential, but not a bad card. Wonder, this is one I know a lot of people don't think it's that great. However, a lot of my deck ends up in the graveyard, and when I can give all my creatures flying, super helpful. I have lots of islands. Most of my dual lands are also islands in this deck, so makes it really easy to bring him online. And you know, for 4 mana, 2/2, obviously doesn't feel good for him to be the only creature when the Gyruda pulls and ends up on the battlefield, but it's usually not hard to put him in front of a blocker or just keep attacking until he becomes obnoxious or whatever. But the effect when he is in the graveyard is really strong, especially if you can maintain your board state. And then finally, of course, doesn't have an ETB. Probably would almost never hardcast him because the game's probably not going to go on that long. But OG Jinkataxis is amazing. Really becomes target priority number 1, no matter what you've pulled out onto the battlefield. So unless they're just throwing a board wipe to deal with your board state, if there's single target removal, probably I would say 7 times out of 10, this one's going to take the bullet over Gyruda. So just a fun card to have in there. For those that don't know what he does, you basically in your end step you draw 7 cards and have no maximum hand size, and then you still have a maximum hand size, but you draw 7 cards, and your opponents have 7 card less maximum hand size. So usually that means that they have to discard all their cards unless they have like Reliquary Tower or something out that allows them to get around that. But just really strong, obnoxious card that, again, I don't usually play him hard. I don't hard cast him. If I get him out, great. He's just really annoying. Honestly, this is one of those ones that I didn't own, and then I just kept pulling him for my buddy, and I was like, I might as well throw him in. He's pretty good, and he happens to be even costed. As you can see, I didn't even get him until I got the secret layer. So just kind of a fun, obnoxious card to really make it annoying for your opponents there. That gives them some hard choices. So then we do have a couple board wipes because it's always good to have a few. Cyclonic Rift is, of course, super nice one because it's one-sided. Toxic Deluge can be situational based on the amount of life that you have to spend to make it happen, but it's another one of those ones that gets around indestructible. And then, of course, Extinction Event for this deck is almost a no-brainer. It can be a little expensive sometimes, but and then it's also very situational on what your opponents are, what type of creatures they have, because obviously if they have a bunch of even costly creatures, it's going to feel real bad to have to choose that. But it's one of those ones that you can protect your side and wipe out all the enemy odd-costed creatures there. So just nice to have options. Let's see. So then we got, it's blue. There's blue, so you need to have some protection, some counter magic. So I have Counterspell. Drown in the Lock is a great one for this deck because once Gyruda starts going, usually your opponent's graveyards fill up really quickly. So makes it real easy. This one is both counter magic and single target removal. So pretty nice. Mana Drain, can't go wrong with that. Same thing with Force of Will and Fierce Guardianship, getting those free spells and Force of Negation. So free counter magic, always nice. And you're probably going to have some blue cards in your deck. Let's see. So I'll save the artifacts for the end there. So this is one of those alternate win cons I was talking about. I don't have Laboratory Maniac in the deck, but Jace is nice. One, it helps you draw cards if you need it. But But the key is the top part there. It's an alternate win con. If you're very close to milling yourself out, and you have him in your hand or you have him on the battlefield, then a lot of times you can kind of cheat your way into victory by triggering Gyruda just enough to mill yourself out and then use his ability to try to draw a card. I almost never use the -8. Usually he's a kill on sight for most people. But that's another way to do it. If you're getting close to the end and you get him out there, and he's at 8+ loyalty somehow, then that's another way to trigger the alternate win con. But just a really solid card. Takes up one card in your deck, and the upside is pretty high if it works out for you. And of course you got Reanimates, just because a lot of stuff's going in the graveyard. Sometimes you need to get it back out. So Reanimate itself. Persist is another good one, nice and cheap. Animate Dead and Haunted Crossroads. This one doesn't reanimate, but it works well with Gyruda's ability to pull from the top of your library. So once this is out, for 1 black, you can just pick a creature that was either milled already or destroyed, put it back on top, and then trigger Gyruda, and then you get it right back. So pretty good. Again, it's kind of slow. This is more for the games that are kind of grinding on or going into late turns for whatever reason. This isn't one that I would probably put if I was thinking I was going to win pretty early in the first 4 or 5 turns, but it's a nice option to have. And then I got some just generally good cards. So card draw to try to get to where I need to go. So Frantic Search, always a good one. Fact or Fiction, same thing. Brainstorm, can be a little situational, but generally pretty good. And then you got the tutors. Or 2 tutors. I only run Vampiric and Demonic Tutor. I think I don't need a ton of tutors in here. Usually if I'm struggling at that point, it's kind of probably going to be a lost cause anyways. And then, of course, Rhystic Study, because card draw, again, super critical, just to have that card advantage as much as possible. And then finally get into the way to win early, and that is with Ramp of some sort. So lots of different mana rocks, and this is where probably the bulk of the actual physical card value lies in this deck. Like I said, this is my premier, what I consider to be my premier deck. I like the flashy stuff. I don't play this one a lot because it is kind of annoying to play. A lot of people don't like mill. But when I bring it out, it's fun because it's like a lot of really nice looking cards. And this is one of the reasons why I still enjoy playing Magic, because there's so many cool cards and so much awesome artwork to look at. And of course, this is probably my favorite piece of art that has come out. Super fortunate to get to meet Elena Danner in Magic 30 down in Las Vegas. Got some cool autograph stuff. Did not have her autograph this card, but I did get an artist proof extended art of the Jewel Lotus. So, and it's just good. I mean, getting 3 mana, especially when your commander's colored mana can be either black or blue, is very, very strong. This can cut down the number of turns by 2 or 3 for when I can actually get him out there. So very strong. Obviously, anytime I can get extra mana, especially if I'm having to cast him later in the game, is nice. So Mana Vault, Mana Crypt, Soul Ring. Can't go wrong with Soul Ring. And of course, this is the flashiest, nicest looking Soul Ring. So went with that. Arcane Signet. This is one of the cool new ones that they're giving out at the conventions. So pretty awesome. Get the old Thanos Gauntlet of Power going there. Thought Vessel, of course. No maximum hand size. Not as relevant in this deck, but I do have a lot of card draw, or some card draw. If I get Jink-Taxis out, things like that make it worthwhile. Commander Sphere, just a good one. Gives you 1 mana of any color and helps you draw a card. Same thing with Mind Stone, just a nice card draw and its ramp. The Signet, if you really need that colored mana, good way to get it there. Same with Talisman of Dominance. And of course, Dark Ritual. So like Dark Ritual combined with any of the mana rocks, I can definitely play my commander on turn 2 sometime, if I'm very lucky with what's in my hand, turn 1. I don't think I've ever done a turn 1 Gyruda, but I've definitely done a turn 2 and a few turn 2s and a bunch of turn 3 Gyrudas, and that can be that can really speed up the outcome of the game. I will just say that. Because I can get a lot of really big bodies, as you've seen in this deck, and then also with what other people are playing in a very short amount of time that just becomes hard to deal with that early in the game. And then Expedition Map, because sometimes there's some lands that just really help out. And it's nice that you can tutor for any land, essentially. It doesn't have to just be basic. So then, last but not least, we'll get into the mana base, or the land base of the deck. So a lot of these first ones are just different dual lands, so super helpful to have access to all the colors that you need. Really makes life a lot easier. As you can see, a decent number of them are the types, so they're tutorable or fetch landable, or activate some different abilities requiring islands or swamps or whatever. Morphic pulls 2 opponents. That's one of the battle bond lands there. Command tower is just good in any color commander that's got more than one. The pathway, and you got the fetch land, polluted delta. So again, just nice way to get the cards that you need in there. And then of course this combo. I don't have as many swamps, but obviously with Urborg that becomes less relevant. But this isn't a way to get Gyruda out quickly because you need a larger number of lands out there. But late in the game, it's an effective way to get him out more often, because an already expensive commander gets prohibitively expensive the more times he goes back to the command zone. So it's good to have him in there. It definitely feels bad if you pull a Cabal Coffers as one of your first lands, because that's one less land that you can tap for mana initially, unless you got Urborg in there as well. And of course, Ancient Tomb's got the extra 2 extra mana on there. And then get into just some utility lands. So like Mortuary Mire is kind of nice because it plays into Gyruda. You play this card, you put a creature on top of the graveyard, and then you trigger him. However, this lets you get some artifacts back. Or at least to be drawable. I generally don't use this to assist Gyruda because I don't have like Blightsteel wouldn't work with Gyruda because as soon as it hit the graveyard, it would go back to your deck, which actually technically I could still access with Gyruda's ability, but it would just be annoying because you'd shuffle them into your deck and then you'd have to pull them back out. So, but I mean, it's just nice to have access to some of the artifacts, especially if somebody popped your Panharmonicon or something like that. Good to get it back. Port of Carfel's nice, same thing. Like it's very expensive to do it, but if you absolutely had to have a creature on top of your entering the battlefield, good way to do it. Mystic Sanctuary might be good for recurring some sort of instant or sorcery, some sort of answer. Of course, Takenuma is always a solid one. Actually, I'm not sure why I don't have the blue one, but I guess I just didn't really feel like I needed it, or maybe I didn't have an extra copy. I'll have to go take a look at that. Command Beacon, just super nice with a very expensive commander. Once it's re-entered your command zone 3 times, and he's costing 12 mana to recast, this can cut that in half, so that's nice. Juka Bog, just a nice hateful card to play on somebody if they're really focusing on their graveyard, especially with how much you add to the graveyard. So that's one downside to this particular deck, is that if you're playing a graveyard enabled deck or opponent has a graveyard enabled deck, then you're really helping them out a lot of times, and they're more than happy to see Gyruda enter the battlefield. Witch's Cottage, same thing, just letting you put a creature from your graveyard on top of your battlefield. And then you got the basic lands, which I know these don't get a lot of love, but these are actually some of my favorite basic lands that have come out in recent memory. I just really enjoy the kind of dark styling of them. I think it goes well with this, with all the different colors of this deck. So yeah, I know this was kind of a long video, but I really wanted to just kind of go through it. So this is my Gyruda deck. I referenced it a fair bit, as I said in the beginning. Hope you enjoyed it. Definitely would be curious to hear what everyone's thoughts are. If you like the content, me doing this, because I do plan on doing this more with some of my other more put together decks. Any thoughts on my actual construction of it? Obviously, I put a lot of time and money into this deck, so got a lot of the better cards that I could put in there are in there. But any glaring omissions that you think I should put in that I haven't, I try to keep up, at least peruse every set that comes out to see if there's some tweak that I can make. I haven't done that recently. I don't think there was much from the Brothers War, but there's definitely cards out there that I might just not know of or not be thinking of that might actually fit in here better than some of these other cards. So yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this. Again, this is going to be in addition to my usual content of pack cracking episodes. So expect this to be coming out probably over the weekends. And as always, if you liked what you saw, please give me a like. If you throw some comments down there, I'd love to hear what you have to say. I know we all love building decks, and Commander is definitely one of the most popular formats. So would love to hear what everyone's thoughts are. Anybody else play Gyruda? Anybody face this regularly or have faced it either on Arena or Magic the Gathering online or in person? And then if you liked what you saw, please subscribe, because this will be I'll definitely be doing some non-pack cracking content more regularly throughout the year going forward here. So I appreciate it, and until next time, thanks for watching.